All right, first of all, I know this is running a little bit late, so I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate y'all staying. Hopefully it will be worthwhile. I think it's a great way to sort of see how active duty folks and those that have retired can see a true, real, full circle experience about what you do every day and how it can affect lives in the future. So this is my story. Okay, whoops. Alright, so who am I? My name is Aaron Lockhart. I was born in Vietnam in 1974, or so I think. Because as Ray says, I have no idea what my birthday is. I celebrate, ironically enough, the day after Mr. Ray Snedeker is my birthday, so July 13th is mine. Interestingly enough, somebody here said something about, oh yeah, would your wife like to take a picture of us? And I was like, wow, okay, I guess I got upgraded. But the truth is, I don't know. I mean, jokingly, I could say I could be old enough to be his wife, but I'm probably within maybe 6 months to a year of my actual age, but I honestly do not know how old I am. So I matriculated and graduated from Virginia Tech with I'm true hokey too. So I have an undergraduate degree in communications and minors in psychology and English. I got my master's degree from Webster in business. And then I started working for the Department of Defense. So I was real young and just went straight into the government as a civil servant. Did that for quite a few years, ended up in Garmisch, Germany. If anybody has been in Garmisch, you probably hate me a lot because I did it for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So I pulled off a decade in Germany, and from there, I now work in Goodfellow Air Force Base. And it's the first time I've ever worked for the Air Force, so I guess maybe that was just meant to be. And so now I'm working in public affairs at Goodfellow Air Force Base. In addition to that, because I apparently have too much time on my hands, I started a couple small businesses. So when I was in Germany, I had a small antique business. In addition to my husband, I run some companies called Strongman Rage, and we did apparel, and I use my photography. It's kind of a long story, but it's all kind of full circle, and I'll kind of explain that here soon too. Okay, so I like to do photography, and this is some of my photography. So some of my trifecta of skill sets is I write, I do graphic design. That's actually PA, graphic design is my career field, and I do photography as a hobby. So as I apparently became the official photographer here, so which I'm happy to do. And these are just some of my shots that I was doing while I was in Germany, and it's a way for me to sort of process and deal with my experiences, so I can kind of use the camera as a filter, and it helps me get through, and you'll see kind of why here as we go along. Okay, so this is me at the wall, and my hand is right by those that died on the C-5 crash, and that's right at 75, which is at the very end of the war, the very end of the war. So this is the book that I wrote. It's called Operation Babylift, Mission Accomplished. I wrote it traveled back with Ray in 2014 to Vietnam. I knew that was an important part of the story, and so we had already kind of set that up. I'd always loved to write. I always wanted to write about this story. I had no idea how it would develop over the years and how it changed. I thought I was just going to write the story of Operation Babylift and kind of, how I was a part of it, but the way it sort of twisted and turned, it brought a whole lot of other people into the story. It's been really amazing. So it was written with retired Colonel Regina Auni, and and I'll explain more of our story in a little bit, but we co-wrote the book together. It came out in 2015. We were shooting for the 40th anniversary of Operation Babylift, and we missed it just slightly, but it was within that year. So it was a great goal. I still kind of can't believe that I'm actually a published writer, but it was a really amazing accomplishment, and really it's just because the story is just that good. So that's me back in Vinh Long. Vinh Long is about 60 miles south of Saigon, and on the left is Sister Ursula Lee, and on the right is Sister Fidelma. And these are pictures that I grew up with my entire life. These were the stories that I was being told because that's all I had was stories. We all have a different form of story as we're getting older, we're growing up, but mine was full of strangers and full of people full of holes. My past story was just filled with holes. So as I got older, my desire, my goal was to try to fill in some of those holes. So because Ray did such a wonderful, comprehensive job about the flight, I don't have to talk about that, which is fantastic. And it makes it a little bit easier to kind of go on to the continuation of the story, if you will. So that's the flight on the day that it took off on April 4th.
That is the actual airplane that's us taking off.
Yes. And then this is obviously the aftermath of it. And I received this picture. That's the picture that I used for the cover of the book. And I designed the cover of the book, I wrote the book, and then there's photography in it that's also mine. But this image came from Bud Trainer. So, and it's funny because Ray and I have only presented one time together. So I don't have his slides. And so I do it independent of him, and I've done talks all over the place. And I always say that, I tell this story, and I'll talk a little bit more why I tell it, but it's interesting that Ray and I have spoken about Operation Babylift literally on opposite sides of the world on the same days. And, I was looking at his presentation, I'm like, I need those slides. I'm like, I don't even have them. So, and he's not seen my presentation, not on my own. So it's kind of a cool experience even for us, as connected as we are, that we still continue to tell our story. So this is me when I was really little. I'm the youngest of 4. So my parents are Caucasian. They had 2 boys naturally. They adopted my sister, and then they adopted me, and I was the last one out. So my sister is not my blood sister, and that's my sister, and she's actually the reason why I'm in Arkansas and why I was able to come down here. So I'm very grateful. We have a really close relationship. Interestingly enough, so we're both born in Vietnam, we're both adoptees, and my sister couldn't care less about the adoptee world. I, however, have made it pretty much the entirety of the last 10 years, I would say. So, but it doesn't matter, she's still my sister, I love her dearly. She's up in Bentonville, so it was a nice turn and burn to be able to come down here, and I heard there was moonshine, so I got in the car, headed down here as quickly as I could. And it's a really unique experience because when we were going back to Vietnam, I told Ray, I said, hey, I'm gonna probably see if my sister wants to come, and I was trying to organize the whole entire trip. And I asked my sister, I said, hey, I'm going back to Vietnam. This is the motherland. Do you want to come? She's like, no, I'm good. I was like, okay, that's cool. So, but nevertheless, she's an amazing woman, and we're very close. So in 1997, I found Regina Auntie. And so the way it happened is I graduated college in 1996, and I finished up my undergrad, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I'd already been working for the government, but I was still thinking, I need to do something more with my life. So I started thinking, well, should I start grad school? And I'm like, I've been wanting to write this book for a really long time. I should try to check it out. And so I started doing research, and this was back in the day when, Netscape was big. And I put in Operation Babylift. And what had come up was an article about Regina Auntie. And I read through it all, and I thought, man, this could be really easy for me to track down, particularly the military part, because there's many different facets of this story. The military part and the C5 is one part of it, and I'll explain a little bit more. And obviously, the nuns are another part of it, because if not for the nuns, they're the ones taking care of me in the orphanage, and that ultimately led to the C5 in the end. So in 1997, I tracked her down. We had just missed each other. I was in the Washington, D.C. area at the time, and she had just left to South Carolina. So I touched base with her, and I kept missing her, and finally we were able to sort of connect. And she remembers it very differently than I remember it, but it was indelible for her. I mean, obviously it was a moment for her where she was like, one of the babies contacted me. Crazy enough, at that point, I was the first one to have done it at that point. So it sort of created the groundwork. And after that, like Ray, he's met other adoptees as well, but somehow, for whatever reason, I was one of the first to start the whole process. So we met, and then it was sort of like a nice, cordial relationship, and we were in 2 different cities at the time. I was in the D.C. area, and she was in South Carolina. But she was coming up to D.C. to do like TDYs and that type of thing. So we were able to meet and have dinner and stuff. And she's a really remarkable woman. She has a tendency to just remember details. So I remember like we had made contact and thought, wow, this is really cool. Maybe I'll use it for a book one day. And then what had happened was she would send me a book out of nowhere on my birthday. And I'm like, who remembers? Like, it was just casual conversation. But it's just the way that she is. And so it kept us kind of in proximity with one another and kept us connected to some extent. Then what had happened sort of changed everything. We both found ourselves in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I don't know why it was Albuquerque, but it was Albuquerque. She became the commander for the med group in Albuquerque, and I was working for a contract management agency, and my ex-husband was stationed there as an Army guy, EOD guy, at Kirtland. Well, that already is rare enough. But there we were already in the same place. So I remember calling her and saying, hey, I'm going to Albuquerque and gonna get married and blah, blah, blah. And she ended up calling me like 2 weeks later and saying, hey, guess what? Come to the same area. So if there's one thing that I've learned, and particularly through my own story, is the amount of connected moments that happen. I don't think they can be coincidental. There's just too many of them. And this was one of them. This was one of the first. So she and I were able to forge an amazing relationship based on proximity. We were in the same place at the same time. So I was able to meet her daughters, and I was able to meet her husband, and they just embraced me, and I became a part of the family. So I affectionately refer to her as my San Antonio mom, because this is actually important for me, because my parents, it was really important how you handled titles. So I never wanted to show disrespect to my parents. So she is very motherly-like to me, but she's not my mom, because my parents made a different sacrifice in order for me to be here. But I have an unbelievable amount of respect for her, and her daughters have accepted me full force. I'm super close with Diana, the one that's next to me. And with my own sister and with this crew, I've just been very fortunate. I've extended my family. You might know that guy. He's a troublemaker. I hear he brings moonshine to things. So this is the three of us on our trip to Vietnam. So this was back in 2014, and this was super stressful for me, because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I don't speak the language. I've never been there since I was born. I don't know anything about the country other than what I've tried to glean from the internet. And I was taking a leap of faith, and I was going to go because I know I needed to have this experience. So I was sitting in my living room with Regina, and I said, we should get this trip planned out, figure it all out. And she's a retired colonel, and he's a chief master sergeant, and so then I became the planner. So it was just okay. It was absolutely okay. But there's a lot of rank in those two, and so I took on that, but it was absolutely okay because I wanted to have a big part in it, and it was really important for me for them to have a good experience as well. So we set out. I had Ray and Regina meet me in Germany because that's where I was living at the time, and then we set out from Germany to Vietnam. Now, this in and of itself was also tender because Ray at one point was having horrible problems with his knee, and he was ready to bail. And he even called me and said, I can't do it, Aaron. And I was like, just try to regroup, and I'll still make it happen, and it'll all be okay. And then he calls me back and he says, nope, I'm coming. I said, oh, this is going to be awesome. So that set the trajectory, and then off we went. So the first day, and I tried to leave the itinerary a bit loose because I didn't want us tied down too much to an itinerary. Everybody knows what it's like to travel. Nobody wants to be on and off a bus and that kind of thing. So I chose to make our own itinerary, try to keep it a little bit loose, and just go and see what it was going to be. So the first day, we actually ended up trying to find the crash site, the original crash site. This is what it looks like today. And that building obviously wasn't there previously, but it was all rice field, as you could see from Ray's pictures. And it was interesting because I had a translator. I was really fortunate to get hooked up with a really nice young woman who helped me navigate the situation. We were in and out of the car, and she was out talking to people, and a lot of people know about these sites because lots of people like me, lots of adoptees come back and they pilgrimage to this area. So, but I never wanted to do it with one of the groups. I wanted to do it my way, and I wanted to go and just make it happen the way that felt right for me. And what felt right for me was to go back with Regina and Ray and do this the right way. So we were able, with the help of some of the locals, we were able to find the place, and we kind of just stood in that field. And the experience for me was very different than the experience for them. For me, again, this is stories. They lived through this. And it was emotional, and all I could do was sort of just try to be a comfort and try to let them know that, what they did, what happened on that day mattered, and I was there with them to remind them that it mattered. So then, this was probably the most excruciatingly difficult experience of my life. We decided to go to a local orphanage, and this changed everything for me and Ray. So Ray and I we were acquaintances, and we had this like special bond, but we were still getting to know each other. I mean, the process of getting to know each other takes time, and so most of us aren't willing to put ourselves, even if we've been through some kind of traumatic experience, aren't willing to put ourselves out there with that intensity. So we set out, and I decided, you know what, I want to go to one of the local orphanages. I just want to see what this is. I want to see what this world, this home, my homeland, if you will, my motherland, what it's like. So the first thing I see are these beds, and I'm looking at these going, oh my God. I'm like, that's what they sleep on? So this is the bunk area, and there's like no mattress. There's just this little mat, and they're all in this room together, and obviously the boys and the girls are separated. But what we found is that we went into each home, and each home was a little bit different. And the children would grow up, the boys I think had to leave a little bit early, like around 15 or 16 or so. But they grew up in this house, and they were like a family. And I remember walking out of the first one, we were meeting everybody, we came with candy, and that was the order said, bring candy, and then you just want to see what it was like. So we were guests in their homes, took our shoes off, that's the custom there. And we got to meet these children, and they were good, and they were loved. And I will never forget, I got through the first visit, and we were sitting there talking, and there were some of the youngest children. And Ray and I walked out, and I was like, okay. And I completely lost it. I completely lost it. Because in that moment, I realized that could have been me. That was me in some regard. And interestingly enough, so there was 4 of us on the trip, and each one of us experienced it very differently. So my husband was with me, Regina was with me, Ray, and then myself. And what I found is some of us had a harder time with this than others, and I was having a hard time in my way, and Ray and I was having a different time, and my husband was having a different time, and Regina was having a different time. And all I could do was think, okay, I'm going to have my experience, whatever that is, however that is. And we both walked out, and I could almost barely take a step, because now everything was real. I mean, it wasn't just this land that was across the ocean. This was where I came from. These are my people. And Ray and I shed tears together, and we connected on a level that I think is hard to describe, because we had experienced a moment of such intense vulnerability without any words between us, but just connected us in a way that will last until the day we die. So then Ray was being extremely charming, like, look at this girl's face. I mean, that's just, he was perfect. This is the way he is, He was being the charmer, he had his iPad, and the kids just loved it, because they hadn't seen that kind of technology before. And he was so fatherly. And in these houses, there's only house mothers. So it's kind of intriguing, because there are no males. So these women take on this job, and that's their job. They never get married. They stay in those homes for a very long time, raising these families, and that's their job. So when a male comes around, the kids are just completely enamored with him. So they just took to Ray like you wouldn't believe. And clearly he was pulling the charm on.
How to make moonshine.
So, and then, he's first, he creates his connection, and then next thing you know, he's got best friends. And then, like I said, they just ate him up, and it was such an amazing experience. And he and I were both fully engaged in it. And I still see those children's faces. And like I said, my photography, this is how I processed it. This is the only way I was going to get through it. Was I had a filter, I had a camera in front of me that could capture those moments. So now every time I look at these, whenever I put these presentations together, I just go right back to that moment in that very instance. And it's one of the coolest things ever. So then, after we went to the first part of the crash, what was that? Was that the front or the back?
There's a nose section.
There's the nose section. That's where the nose section had been. Then it's a long story, but we are at the mercy of people that we do not speak the language. And it's not I've traveled all over Europe. I can get away with English, and I can also speak a couple different languages, not Vietnamese, of course. But the problem was we were literally at the mercy of my interpreter. And so we're trying to get back to this site. My interpreter's not with me. She's given me a phone, and I'm trying to call her. I'm like, we're going the wrong way, because what happened is this was Memorial Day, and right? Yeah, it was Memorial Day, and so we were No, it was Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
That's right, it was Veterans Day because it was in November. So this was Veterans Day, and it was really important to me that we go back and we bring, because in Vietnam there's oftentimes have shrines, and it was really important for me personally, and I think it was important for Regina and Ray too, to go back and bring some offerings as they do for the shrines for those of whom we lost on that particular day. On Veterans Day felt really right. So we're driving there, and we don't have my interpreter. I've got her on the phone, and I'm like, none of this looks right. None of this looks like it did the first time around. So next thing I know, they're talking to all the locals, and they're like, we're going down all these back roads. I'm like, okay, we're either going to die or we're going to find this place. Because at this point, I have no idea what's going to happen. Next thing I know, we're walking down the street, and I'm like, none of this looks familiar. And they're like, just come on, just come on. I mean, the English problem was really significant. Next thing we know, we end up at this little shrine that's literally in this guy's front yard. And they're like, this is the shrine. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But I had seen pictures of a shrine online, and I had no idea where it was because when we were at that field, it was just the field. So I'm trying to put the pieces together quickly to try to understand what's going on. Come to find out that this shrine was where the back part of the airplane was.
The base of that is the tail section, part of the tail section. You can't get out of the ground. He built a shrine on top of it.
Right, so underneath right here is a piece of the plane. And so that's what was the shrine. But there was no indication whatsoever in there that what this was. So I decided, because I'm a graphic designer, because I lead a project, is that I was going to create something to remark on what this was for so that people who showed up would understand why we're here and why people keep coming to this area. The good fortune is this guy, he actually takes care of this shrine as a homage, understanding why it's there for those of whom perish, both the children and the adults. So we brought some offerings and we lit some incense, and it was an important moment for all of us. And this is the little I want to say placard, but I just framed it. I worked with the interpreter to get it translated into Vietnamese, so that if Vietnamese people came, if other adoptees like me came, it had its purpose, and we could allow people to see what that purpose was for. And this was on our last day, so that was us going back, because we went back on the last day, and I had purchased an owl dye and had it custom made, and that's a whole nother long story, but basically, my parents were of the mind, and this was kind of the 70s mindset, was, you're an American and you're American and nothing else, which meant that I had no connection to my heritage and my culture. So while I completely agree, I am 100% American, but I am from Vietnam and I am Vietnamese. And so I came very late to the party to try to understand a little bit more about my heritage. So for me to have an owl dye and to be able to stand there in my country is still, to me, it's me recognizing, accepting, and appreciating and loving all sides of me, my American side and my Vietnamese side. So this has been long, and it's kind of an intriguing situation. So the orphanage in which I came from was actually kind of like a compound, and what had happened is these Catholic nuns, the Good Shepherd sisters, they had started this in really early, I want to say like 1958 or so. And what it was a compound to take young girls off the street who were in prostitution, essentially, and teach them a trade, and then put them back out there with some kind of skill and some kind of hope, basically, so that they weren't on the streets. What they found is, as they were trying to create this compound, if you will, is that they found a need for an orphanage, and that's how I came into the world. So this was us returning back. I went back to Vinh Long. Again, it's about 60 miles south of Saigon, and it's now a government building, and we could not get in there at all. And I won't go on and on because there's too many coincidences that get a little bit convoluted, but when I was here, there was a woman that was across the street selling something who had actually taken classes inside when it was the compound for the Good Shepherd sisters. And the irony of it was just unbelievable, but timing and everything. So this is what it is, and now there's a bridge, and at the time there was a dirt road, and I think it took upwards of 3 hours to go those 60 miles, and they were traveling back and forth to Saigon to take the babies back and forth. So this is a huge improvement from where they are today. Okay, so I need to explain a little bit about this, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. So what had happened is that I was born in Vinh Long, and that early on in my presentation, there was a picture of me with a nun on the left side. That was Sister Ursula Lee. She died on the plane crash, and all of my answers and any possibility of me ever knowing anything about my history died with her. So what had happened was I was traveling around, and I do strongman raids. I do strongman photography. So my husband was an amateur strongman, and I kind of got on the circuit of doing pro strongman. And I was traveling throughout the world, taking pictures and doing some photography on the side. And what had happened is the finals, and we're going on in Malaysia at the same time that we were in Vietnam. And the organizer was like, "You need to come. We'll pay your flight. Just come on over." And I'm like, I kind of got this life thing going on that I'm trying to uncover my roots here, so I don't really think I'm going to go. He's like, no, come. It's just a weekend. You're going to be, it's not a problem. So I nervously told, Regina and Ray, like, we're taking off for a weekend. So at first, I was really concerned because I had planned this whole trip. I felt really badly. I was kind of like leaving them and heading over to Malaysia. But of all ironies, I have this book that was written by some of the Vinh Long sisters, and it talks about the history of the orphanage. So I'm reading through that book, and actually Regina was right on her way to Vietnam, and she's reading, she's like, "Hey, did you know that Sister Ursula was from Malaysia?" And I was like, "No." And I was like, that for some reason I had it in my head that she was from the Philippines, but no, she was from Malaysia. So like, all right, Malaysia's a big country. I mean, Texas is a huge state, like there's no way I'm gonna be close. So we look it up, and she was from Kuala Lumpur, and I was going to be 15 minutes from there. So I thought, okay, it still gives me chills. Like, holy shit, no way. This is not possible. But it was. So I sent a note to the Archdiocese, and I said, hey, any chance I could see Sister Ursula Lee's grave, because I knew she was buried there. And they said, I get an email back from a man who is Sister Ursula's nephew by marriage. And I'm like, holy shit, this can't be possible. But it was. And so we met for the first time. This is Jude. So Jude Benjamin is Sister Ursula's nephew by marriage, and so his wife is her niece. So I met him, and he was like, I said, I would really like to see Sister Ursula's grave. And he said, okay, I'll make arrangements for you. So we met very briefly, and then I was doing photography in the middle of it, and it was like this whirlwind trip. So the next day, in the morning, the strongman events are late in the afternoon. I'm like, okay, let me go and do this thing in the morning. I show up, whole family's there. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I don't know any of these people. And my husband didn't come. I was by myself because Regina and Ray were back in Vietnam. My husband didn't come with me. So I was like, all right, let's see how this is going to go. I didn't really know how I was going to react. I had no idea how I would feel. So I stood in front of her grave, and her whole family, her actual sister, she was one of like 13 children. And I hear these stories about her, and I hear about how she was devoutly religious, even though her family really wasn't. But she was one of the oldest. And so she had to stay with the family, and she couldn't join to become a nun because her family was like, no, we need you here. So she held off, waited a couple years, tried again. Hear a story from her sister about how her mom, they literally snuck out the back for her to join and become a nun because her parents were so adamantly against it. Later on, I hear a story about how her mother threw her body onto the casket when it came back, and she was so mad at her for it because she spent almost 15 years in Vietnam. And I wish desperately that I could have said something to her mom, or I could have known her mom to say, it was because of her work that I can stand here. And I know it was hard to lose her, and I know it was hard to put that into any kind of context because you still lost your daughter. But her work allowed me this amazing life, these amazing opportunities, and I never forget that. And so when I stood in front of her grave, I thought, this is a piece of stone. I don't really know if I'm going to connect with this. And for whatever reason, the flood of emotions were there immediately. And I lost it, but in such a way that it was, I wasn't sure why. I mean, I get choked up at this point every single time, and I cannot tell you how many times I've told this story. Because every time I look at that death date, 4/4/1975, that day was the day that she allowed me the opportunity to have this life. And I never forget that. Ray reminds me every single day, and Gina reminds me, and all of you that serve our country and that have served, remind me of that every single day. So I did. I stood there and I wept. And I wept with her family, and they comforted me. And I thought, why am I so emotional about this? And I struggled with it. I struggled with it for a long time. And then I thought, I know why. Because I went to that orphanage, and I saw what those house mothers were doing, and they were loving those children. And she was loving me, and she was my first semblance of what a mother is. And for that reason, she will always be important in my life. And so, for that reason, everything that I have, everything that I am, is some symbol of where I came from. So I have a tattoo that says peace. It's right there. I have a tattoo that has the Good Shepherd Sisters cross and their symbol, because they are a part of me, and I get to tell their story, as well as I get to tell Ray's story, and I get to tell the Air Force story, and I get to tell all these different pieces and parts. So then, if there wasn't enough more connections in my life, I found another one. So I'm in Germany, and I had released my book, and NPR was doing an interview with a trainer, and they ended up getting both Regina and I on that NPR interview. So I was in Germany, it wasn't super easy for me, so I ended up going to Munich to go do the interview. Well, at that same time, if it was an email or if it was a phone call, but I get this note, it's like, hey, I met this guy, I know of you from Ray Snedeker, because he's the trouble, he's always he's always the path to trouble. And so she's like, if you could come up to Oberammergau in this class, and I'm like, Oberammergau, that's like 15 minutes from me. So I'm like, all right, I just went to Munich for this interview. I'm like, I'll come back down. And so Operation Babylift was obviously very close in my mind at that time. So I come back down, and lo and behold, I meet Kathy Disney. And I'm like, okay, this is really unique. I'm now getting another connection across the ocean in Oberammergau. This gentleman, Mark Alef, he is from Luxembourg. And he was in the class with Kathy. And she's like, yeah, this guy's another Operation Babylift survivor. And I was like, no way, this is not even possible. I just talked about this on the radio. So, but he was really nice, but his English wasn't great. So of all greater ironies, I speak some really crappy German, but I was able to communicate with him primarily in German. And I'm thinking, what are the freaking odds? And not only am I in Garmisch, which is 15 minutes from Oberammergau, and Kathy Disney, who knows Ray Snedeker, who this guy doesn't speak much English, but I speak German. What are the odds? I should totally play the lottery. I should play the lottery. So then so from there, this actually was kind of, after the trip was kind of where I stopped with the book part of it. But then I continued on the journey. So then I was like, all right, I'm overseas. I knew they were going to kick me out of being overseas because they're like, you've been in Garmisch for a decade. That's not okay. Get your ass back to the States. So, which was okay. I was totally okay with that, but I was going to take advantage of it. So I ended up looking for some of the other nuns that had been in Bin Long. So these two nuns were in Bin Long when I was there. And so I met them in Manchester, and we got to know each other. And I can't tell you how many meals I shared with nuns. And that's a pretty amazing experience, I'm like, I see amazing, wonderful examples of people throughout my life. And if there's something that I can emulate, I think it's the love, the kindness, and the appreciation for all small things that the nuns can give. And I am always amazed by them. And then this is Sister Fidel when I was a baby, and this is her now.
Wow.
So in all of this as well, I decided, all right, I found out that she was in Taiwan. And so nowadays, after living overseas and learning about, and this is something that I think most of you all can relate to because you are military or you've been in the military, is somehow that flight over the ocean at one point in your life might have seemed really, really far. Then all of a sudden it doesn't seem so far. I mean, it's kind of just a hop, skip, and a jump. So I set out, all right, you know what, this is one life. I have one opportunity. So I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to go to Taiwan. So I did, and I tracked her down. And we hung out, had a meal, and I got to say thank you. And that's kind of my theme, is I go around and I let people know that I know what you did, and I don't ever forget it. So and then I went to Angers, France. This was the mother house. So for me, this is sort of the nun journey, okay? And so I am not a particularly religious person. I'm going to be 100%. Obviously, I drink moonshine. So
you must did another one.
That's right. So, but I can't ignore the faithful things that have happened in my life. And so I try not to, and I appreciate it, but I usually will tell the nuns a lot of times, I'm like, we're really bad Catholic. But they are very forgiving, and they're very loving, and they're very embracing. So I went to the mother house because I wanted to see what in the world brought these women to make this life choice that helped me to have the life that I have. Because it's a very direct line. As direct a line as it is that, raising my life. So, all these things, they're all connected. So this was, what was kind of amazing is this was the I forget what she's called it. She's like the head mother of that organization. And she was so forward thinking back in the day that she has, the Good Shepherd Sisters are all over the world. And their main plight and their main focus and is to help women and children. And I was one of those children that were helped as a result of their focus and what their purpose is to be on this earth. And they have this, in France, they have this door knocker, and it was basically all those who were in need were welcome there. And so it was important for me to be able to show that I knocked on that door, even though I didn't even realize I did. Okay, so I'm almost done here. So then I also found out, so right next to my orphanage or the compound were some Black Hawks. And these were helicopter pilots because there was a base that was right next to where my orphanage was. So I found out about these guys. I don't know if it was because of the book or somehow I found out about some of these types of things. And so I was invited to their reunion in San Antonio. Now, interestingly enough, I had just gotten back to the States. So I just gotten back in June and I was in San Antonio for this reunion. And I didn't even understand. I was like, were they all in Bin Long? Were they all a part of one group? I didn't really fully understand it. And then if you all were at yesterday's presentation, I heard that amazing story with the Huey helicopters and that save and all that type of thing. So this was the base there. And they were Loach pilots, Huey, and Cobra pilots. I didn't know anything about all of that until I went to the Black Hawk reunion. So I realized that was a whole nother part of the story. And they embraced me entirely. It was pretty amazing. So this was their crew. And this was very similar to this type of reunion, and they drink. That they don't have moonshine. So they drink, and then I was able to tell my story to them. And what I found was the process of telling my story connects with a lot of people. It connects with a lot of people on a lot of different levels. And for these folks, for these guys, Vietnam was not pretty, and it was not good. And I don't know anything about that. It's a story for me. But when I stood in front of them, I told them my story, and I said, you, of all people, are really connected to me. You guys protected that village. You guys protected my nuns. You guys helped to ensure that I could stand in front of you. And every one of them knew that I wasn't bullshitting. I mean, I meant this through my heart, and it wasn't something small. I meant it completely. And they felt that. And I think for a lot of them, it was healing, because they realized that the pain that they went through, it did allow people like me to have really amazing lives. So, and then I'll tell another quick really story. So, sorry for all the different stories, but so this situation is really unique. So, social media is what it is, right? I mean, sometimes it's an abyss of crap, and sometimes it's a tool. And so I use it as a tool, So, plug Operation Babylift Mission Accomplished for my book if you'd like to like that. But in addition to that, so the unique thing is I don't post a lot of stuff on my Facebook, but you're all welcome to friend me on Facebook. I post a lot of stuff sometimes for the book, or I post stuff where I do talks. I'll probably talk a little bit about this. But it's because I have affiliations with a lot of different people and lots of acquaintances. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. But anyway, I get this random note on my Facebook from somebody who says that they have this medal from my pageant. So it's the Meritorious Service Medal. And they're like, do you happen to know who Michael Paget is? I'm like, yes, I know who Michael Paget is. He died on the C5 crash. And they're like, we have this medal, and we got it from like a yard sale or something. We really don't know where it came from. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, all right, here's the thing. I said, because Regina knew his brother, because he had read our book. And he was like, send her a note through email, and they were in connection with one another. So I said, okay, this is crazy. And so I asked the lady, she was really nice. I said, can you send the medal to me? I said, I need to do this right. So she sent the medal to me, and in a wonderful twist of fate, I won $1,000 from a story I wrote. And I took that $1,000, and I grabbed Regina into the car, and I drove because she was a scary driver. And, and everybody knows that. So for 12 hours, I drove from Texas, where I am, to Colorado Springs. And we hand-delivered the medal. And I talked to him briefly, and I said, we were corresponding by email, because I didn't want to tell him why I was showing up. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna be just happen to be in the area. You know, Regina happens to be with me. Can we stop in? And I'd just like to visit. So he was like, yeah, absolutely. So, but the whole point of us going was to return this medal. So we show up on his doorstep, and I say, and I see that he's got like the picture of his brother. That's him, Glenn. And he's got a picture of his brother, and he's got these medals framed, and I'm like, oh shit. Like, did something go wrong? Because he's got the meritorious medal in a frame. So I'm like, and I haven't told him why I'm there yet, and I'm just like, oh man, this could have been a very long 12 hours. But I'm like, nevertheless, I still will be here to show my appreciation to him and for his sacrifice that his brother made. So whatever the story is. So then he tells me, so then I break it out. I said, so here's the thing. I don't know if these medals are usually engraved, because I don't think they are. But maybe because of him dying in the flight or whatever, maybe that's why they have it engraved. So he said, okay, so I started telling him the story. He's like, here's the thing. He goes, I had these medals, the airman medal and this medal, and I took them to Michael's, and they lost the paperwork for the airman's medal. And I thought, okay, this is really weird. So, and then I started wondering, like, did they just replace that medal and they lost it somehow, and that's how it ended up somewhere across the country in some yard sale? I will never know. But all I know is I believe so fully that it is in the right place now. So, and then there's Ray. This guy dragged me to a Kentucky game and said, I'm going to make you a Kentucky fan, because he is the craziest Kentucky fan ever. And I unwillingly went, and then I saw how cool it was. And I thought, you know what, this is a lot of fun. So he and I, when he told me about this, and every chance we can get, it's been tough, I'll be honest, it's been tough coming back overseas after 10 years. But the best part is I've seen Ray more in the last year than I've seen him in 10 years. And he and I, every time we visit, it's a deeper connection. And I often think about, and when I do these talks, I say, okay, I talk really fast, or I always feel badly sometimes taking up so much time. But the thing is I'm like, why do I bother? Why do I tell this story? Because this is a different story than the way Ray tells. Ray can speak to technicalities of you all, particularly as loadmasters. I can't do that. But I can tell you about this story, about how I was on this flight, and there's a loadmaster on there, and there's these folks that served our country who were responsible for me standing in front of you. And that's the real deal. So I tell the story because whether you're a millennial, or whether you are whether you're Vietnam era, or X or Y generation, no matter what, this story matters. This story matters because no matter, you might not know what you're doing in today, but you're making conscious choices that the nuns made, that the military made, that everybody gets to make, and an opportunity to be better people. And sometimes when you're not even realizing it, you can actually affect and change and create an opportunity for someone like me to have this amazing life. So I thank you, and I appreciate your service, not just as
Yeah, we're gonna drink some moonshine.
All right.
Sure.
Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. It was everything.
Okay, all right.
So,
How about your book?
I do have my book, so if anyone would like a copy, it's $20. You can come see me, and I'll be happy to autograph it. And again, it's an opportunity to share my story, and I appreciate you all being willing to listen to it.
Okay, so if everyone will grab a seat real quick.
Let me interrupt that first. If you buy the book, I wrote the foreword, so that's the best part of the book.
Everything that comes after it?
Do we get a
autograph that part too?
Hey, do we get a free pint of moonshine with every purchase? All right, I know we've been here for a while. That was absolutely 100% worth the time. The event is not over. I know that this is sort of the end of the professional development part, if you will. Of course, we've got the general membership meeting tomorrow and the banquet tomorrow evening. But not everyone's going to make it to that. I want to take the time to address our younger active duty folks in the room. And Kathy, I'm sorry if I'm stealing your thunder, but I'm going to do it anyway. So here's the deal. This is why this organization is important, okay? Ron Sharp's story, Ray's story, Aaron's story, Ralph and Charlie's story. The other stuff we got this week was good information for you to have. But as some of you, we dragged you here, right? There's probably a lot of you that did not know what you were getting into this week. We need you guys coming into this organization, and a lot of times when we hold these things, for whatever professional organization it is, whether it's APSA or ATA or whatever, those of us that are a little older ask ourselves, okay, we got to tell our younger guys why. Why do they need to become part of this? And I'm not selling this for memberships. That's not the thing. Somebody said it earlier today. This is a fraternal organization, right? And this is why it's important. So that those stories can keep getting told. You guys probably have a little bit better appreciation for those that came before us, that created what we are today, why we are a professional Loadmaster Association today. So as you drink a lot of moonshine tonight, reflect on that, all right? And that's all I'm going to say. I'll get off my soapbox there. It was an amazing day. It was amazing the past couple of days, I think. I want to say thank you to all of our guest speakers. That was, we got a lot out of it. Unless you've got something to say, we'll get out of here.
Go have fun.